She wasn't supposed to be there. That's what every man in that room thought the moment she raised her hand. 900 yards of open range. A steel target the size of a torso. Wind gusting at 17 knots out of the west. One round. No spotter. No warm-up. No do-overs. 3 trained special operations candidates had already stepped to that line. 3 of the best shooters the United States military had selected for this phase of a joint sniper pipeline. Tier 1 operators. Men who had spent years mastering long-range precision. All 3 missed. And Grace Halley, a civilian contractor with no rank, no unit patch, just a laminated badge hanging from a lanyard, was about to ask for her turn. The classroom at Fort Harper's long-range complex smelled like gun oil, dry dust, and coffee that had been sitting on a burner since before sunrise. 12 candidates stood around the briefing table, all in uniform, all handpicked for this phase of the multi-branch sniper training pipeline. Most came from Navy SEAL teams, a few from Army Special Forces. Every single one of them knew that the next 2 days would separate the ready from the almost ready, and the almost ready would go home. At the front of the room stood Commander Brett Alman, 24 years in naval special warfare, had carved every line into his face and stripped the excess from his voice. He didn't waste words. He didn't waste people. He got to the point and expected everyone else to keep up. Behind him, a whiteboard listed the first evaluation lane in block letters. Cold War engagement, elevation and wind corrections unaided. 1 round only. Alman tapped the marker against the board as he laid it out. The target was a standard torso-sized steel silhouette, posted at the far end of range 12. Shooters would take the shot cold. No warm-up rounds. No spotters calling corrections. No second chances. Wind had picked up from the west, gusting around 17 knots. It wasn't expected to drop. He turned to face the group. Who's confident enough to make this hit? First round. Cold bore. No adjustment. 3 hands went up. Then a 4th. It was a quiet motion. Steady, unhesitating. At the far end of the room, Grace Halley stood in civilian layers of fleece-lined jacket, worn range pants, hair pulled back into a tight coil. Her hands were rough from years of recoil and early mornings. The badge around her neck said one thing: contractor. The room went still in a way that had nothing to do with noise. Alman glanced over his shoulder. His eyes found her face for exactly 1 second. Then he laughed. Short and sharp. Not cruel, exactly, but cutting. Someone check the coffee situation, he said. Maybe she can handle that while the adults talk shooting. A few candidates looked away. One stared at the floor. Nobody said a word. Grace didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't lower her hand right away. When she finally did, it was slow, controlled. She gave a single small nod, turned, and walked toward the door. The hinges clicked softly behind her. Outside, the wind moved through the scrub grass along the perimeter road, flattening it in gusts, letting it rise again like breath. She stood just beyond the storage connex where extra gear was staged. Her boots stayed rooted. Her face was still. She had heard versions of that tone before. In units, in training courses, in meetings where she'd been introduced as an instructor, and someone's eyes immediately searched the room for the nearest man to confirm what they were hearing. It was a specific kind of dismissal. The kind that didn't need to be allowed to land. She didn't need to prove anything to those men. Not yet. But someone would ask again. And when they did, she'd be ready. Grace Halley grew up on 10 acres of wind-scored land outside Lander, Wyoming. Her father was a retired Air Force pilot who had flown B-52s during Gulf War operations. When he came home, he built a small shooting range behind their barn. Nothing fancy, repurposed steel plates, old target frames, enough open space to stretch a shot past 300 yards. He didn't treat the range like a hobby. He treated it like a classroom. By the time Grace was 10, she could hold a rifle in a stable prone position and read mirage lines dancing above the summer grass. Her father didn't believe in formal instruction. He taught through repetition. Wind flags, bullet drop, elevation holds. Every correction was a quiet conversation between shooter and landscape. The rifle doesn't care, he used to tell her. The wind doesn't care, only the shooter does. He said it like a fact, not a lesson. By 13, she was calling wind shifts and adjusting for distance at 400 yards without asking anyone for help. She didn't brag about it. She didn't need to. The target told the truth every time. After high school, she tried the expected path. Community college in Riverton. 2 years of gen ed courses, switching majors every semester. Nothing held. She wasn't built for that kind of structure, the kind where the stakes felt soft, where precision didn't matter, where you could be halfway right and still pass. She wanted something harder, Something that didn't lie to you. She walked into the Marine Corps recruiting office at 10:15 on a Thursday morning. The sergeant behind the desk sized her up with a quick glance. The look of a man who had seen 100 kids walk through that door already that week. When she told him she wanted to do something that counted, he raised one eyebrow and slid the paperwork across the desk. Boot camp was exactly as brutal as she expected. She didn't flinch. She moved through Camp Pendleton's School of Infantry with a kind of quiet determination that doesn't get written up in newsletters but gets remembered by instructors when a slot opens in Scout sniper screening. Her platoon sergeant wrote her recommendation without being asked. Sniper selection broke most candidates before the end of the first week. Long days under a loaded ruck. Endless stalks through sand and sagebrush. Under the eyes of evaluators who had seen every shortcut and punished everyone. Shooting evaluations with zero margin for error. On the range, Grace's scores were surgical. Her final stalking exercise came within inches of compromise, a near miss that would have ended other candidates. She passed. She graduated in the top 5 out of 22. She didn't tell anyone back home. Her father already knew what she could do. She deployed twice to Helmand Province as part of Overwatch teams supporting combat engineers. The missions were the kind that don't make highlight reels long. Hours lying motionless behind a scope, watching the same stretch of road through the same heat shimmer, waiting for something that might never come. Most days it didn't. She never took a shot that wasn't cleared, not because she lacked confidence, because she understood what precision actually meant. Precision wasn't about pulling the trigger. It was about knowing exactly when not to. She saw close calls. An IED team moving along a ridgeline to hills over. One threat she tracked for 40 minutes and never got a clean enough identification onto ACT. The engineers she was covering came home intact after every operation. That was the mission. That was enough. When she left the Corps, it wasn't her choice. Force reduction swept through her unit and junior NCOS with her MOS were cut. There was no drama. Just a DD to 1-4, a handshake, and a 7:20 flight out of Pendleton. She landed a job at a civilian shooting facility outside Grand Junction, Colorado. Most mornings, she arrived before 6. She reset steel targets at long range, checked zeros, and coached shooters who wanted to actually improve, not just feel better about their groupings. She corrected grips, adjusted body positions, spoke only when something mattered. She didn't mention her deployments, didn't bring up sniper school. If someone asked where she learned to shoot, she usually said Wyoming. Her past wasn't something she wore. It lived in the way she handled a rifle, in the way her eyes moved to the wind flags before her hands moved at all, in the way silence didn't unsettle her, it informed her. Grace didn't tell her story. She lived it, one shot at a time. The wind coming of the hills had real teeth. She stood near the Connex box, hands tucked into her sleeves, watching the grass flatten and recover in slow, rhythmic waves. She wasn't restless. She was reading. Inside the tower, the first candidate stepped to the line. Silence settled. Then the low, sharp crack of a rifle. The spotter's voice came over the radio, calm and clipped. Wide left. 20 inches. Grace didn't move. A few minutes passed. The second shooter rushed his setup, pressed the trigger too early, sent the round low into the dirt berm. He stood up stiffly and walked off the line without a word. The third candidate took his time. His position looked solid, his setup clean. The shot broke well. The round landed just off the right edge of the plate. Close. Good. Enough to be painful. Not good enough to count. Nobody said much. The quiet had weight to it now. 3 elite candidates. 3 misses. The wind hadn't let up for a second. Grace stayed outside. She wasn't cold. She wasn't nervous. The air was speaking in flags and grass and shimmer. She was listening. Footsteps approached from behind. A senior chief from the Navy side of the cadre. Steady eyes, no smirk. You really think you can make that shot? Yes. He studied her for a moment. Why? She kept it simple. She'd trained on the M110 system for over 7 years. She'd shot expert on every range she'd ever qualified on. She understood this win not perfectly, but well enough to hold correctly. He didn't scoff, didn't perform skepticism for an invisible audience. He just nodded once and looked toward the tower. 10 minutes later, Commander Alman walked across the gravel. Deliberate pace. No expression he was giving away early. He stopped in front of her. I heard you want to turn. I do. The live fire supervisor has cleared it. He paused just long enough to make it land. 1 shot. If you miss, you're off the contractor roster. No second chances. Grace didn't blink. That sounds fair. Alman gave a tight nod and turned back toward the firing line. She followed. She didn't look at the other candidates watching from the side. She didn't look at the tower. She looked at the grass. 900 yards. One round. No warm-up. Something in the way she stepped onto that line said she wasn't there to ask for space. She was there to take it. The gravel was firm under her boots. The wind pushed steady from her left 17 knots, maybe more in the gusts. She moved with quiet purpose, the kind that doesn't explain itself. A range staff member handed her the Knight's Armament M110. SAS. The suppressor was cool to the touch. The optic wasn't her. She registered that immediately. Zeroed and re-zeroed by other hands. That didn't rattle her. She lowered into prone. Elbows wide. Knees out. Chest flat. Before anything else, she cleared the action. Bolt back. Chamber checked. Bore clean. She seated the magazine. Confirmed the latch. Checked the scope mount. 2 firm presses at the base. No play. Suppressor snug. Turrets intact. She noted the current dial settings. Then she dialed her own. She slipped behind the rifle and let herself settle. Her breathing slowed as her cheek found the comb. The reticle swam for half a second, then steadied. The steel silhouette stood 900 yards out small. Patient, indifferent. Just above the plate, the Mirage drifted left to right in slow, liquid motion. She watched it longer than most shooters would. Mid-range boil. Slight upward thermal, not severe. A steady left to right. Push that matched what the grass had been telling her for the past 20 minutes. She ran the numbers quietly. Known cold bore shift on this. Platform pushed the first round roughly a half mil left. Distance plus environmental factors gave her 3.1 million Israeli new shekels of elevation. She dialed it cleanly. Wind held at 2.5 meters per second. She would hold for it in the reticle, not chase it with the turret. Natural point of aim came next. She adjusted her body by inches, not the rifle. Checked it twice. Let her spine relax. Let her pulse fall into sync with the ground beneath her. Her finger found the trigger face. No pressure. Just contact. She exhaled once. Then again. On the third breath, she held just before the natural bottom. The shot broke like a door closing softly in a quiet house. The rifle rolled straight back. Not high, not left. Grace stayed on the glass. She caught the trace. A faint silver line bending through the air at the edge of visibility. Curving slightly in the crosswind, then disappearing. The spotter's voice came over the radio. Steady, almost bored. Center mass. Impact confirmed. Nobody spoke. Not for a long moment. Grace lifted her head from the scope, rolled clear of the rifle, and ran the bolt to the rear. She removed the magazine, set the weapon on the mat with the muzzle pointed safely downrange, and stood. She dusted of her sleeves, stepped back from the line. The silence didn't break right away. Commander Alman walked to the spotting scope in the tower, bent over the eyepiece and adjusted the focus slowly. He stared for a long time. When he finally straightened, his jaw had tightened. But it wasn't anger. Something had shifted behind his eyes. A recalibration. He walked across the gravel toward her. Where did you learn to shoot like that? My dad taught me to read wind, she said. The Marine Corps taught me everything else. Behind them, the senior chief allowed himself a dry grin and looked at Alman, without raising his voice much. Her resume's been in your inbox all week, sir. Alman didn't respond right away. He looked back at the target, then at Grace, and this time, he actually looked. He walked the length of the range carrying the steel plate himself. The impact mark sat just left of center clean. Deliberate. Exactly where a shooter would aim it. He stopped in front of the candidates, lifted the target to chest height, and turned it toward them. His voice was level, but it carried weight. This is what right looks like. No one said a word. He glanced back at Grace, still standing near the mat where she had cleared and staged the rifle. You willing to coach the next round? No sarcasm. No qualifiers. Just the question. She gave a small nod. The wind held steady through the afternoon, and Grace stayed at the line. She didn't talk much. She spoke when something was wrong, and stayed quiet when it wasn't. She corrected elbow placement, repositioned shoulders, asked each shooter what they were seeing in the Mirage before they dialed anything. One candidate couldn't stabilize his breathing. She tapped the small of his back and told him to let his ribcage move, not his shoulders. Another was breaking the trigger to early, the most common problem at distance, the one that ruins more shots than wind ever does. She slowed him down and walked him through a dry press until the motion felt right. 3 of the 4 candidates made solid hits. The 4th missed his first but adjusted, found the edge of the plate on his second, and earned his pass. Commander Alman watched from the tower the entire time. He didn't interrupt. He didn't pace. He watched. By 1,600, the last shooter had cleared the line. The range crew began breaking down equipment and the candidates filed back toward the classroom. Grace started gathering her gear. Alman appeared at her side and motioned toward the back of the Connex. Out of earshot from the others, he kept his voice quiet. I was wrong. He didn't dress it up. I should have read your file before you walked in that room. I judged you on assumption. That was on me. Grace shrugged slightly. It happens. It shouldn't. He shook his head. Not here. A pause settled between them. Not awkward. Real. You've got a spot on this range anytime you want it, he said. She nodded once. I appreciate that. The following Monday, she opened her inbox at 7:15 a.m. The first flagged message read, Invitation National Sniper Training Symposium. Confirm attendance. Later that day, her supervisor pulled her aside. The training center had renewed her contract. Her rate had been increased. No long explanation. No ceremony. Grace didn't tell her coworkers what had happened at Fort Harper. Didn't tell her students. She showed up the next morning before sunrise. The same as always, resetting steel. Checking zeros. Watching the wind move through the frost on the fence line. Whatever changed, it wasn't inside her. It was everything around her finally catching up. It was still dark when she poured into the range the following week. Headlights swept across frozen gravel and caught frost clinging to the chain link fence. She shut the engine off and sat for a moment, letting the silence settle. The clock read 6:02 a.m. The air had real bite when she stepped out. Her breath turned white in the cold. She walked to the Connex and grabbed a single target from the stack inside, carrying it one-handed down the path to the long-range pit. The sky had just started fading from black to a washed-out blue, the kind that only comes on mornings like this, clear and still and cold enough to feel honest. She mounted the target on the frame without rushing, tightened the clamps, stepped back and checked the line. No students on the schedule, no other instructors, just her, the wind, and 900 yards of open ground. Grace laid out her mat at the firing position. She'd brought her own rifle Zero the week before, cleaned and inspected the night prior. She dropped into prone and slipped behind the scope out of habit. The reticle settled. The mirage was already rising above the cold earth, drifting left to right in a smooth, steady current. She made a wind call under her breath, held for it, as if she might squeeze the shot. But she didn't. She just breathed. The rifle doesn't care. The wind doesn't care. Only the shooter does. Her father had said it 100 times across a Wyoming field, standing behind her while she found her position for the first time. He'd said it like gravity, not a lesson, just the way things were. She had carried it through sniper school, through helmet, through force reduction and transition, and every morning she'd shown up to a range before anyone else arrived. She had carried it into a room full of operators who laughed when she raised her hand. She had carried it to the firing line when one miss meant walking away for good. She stayed behind the scope a while longer, eyes relaxed, not searching, just seeing. Then she rolled off the line, brushed her hands clean, and stood. No shot fired. No need. The wind had already told her what she came to hear. If this story hit different, if you believe the quiet ones are often the most dangerous, and that real skill doesn't need an introduction, you're in the right place. This channel is called Silent Warriors, and we tell the stories that don't get told loudly. Hit like if Grace earned it. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And drop a comment, who do you know that leads like she does? Quietly, without asking for the room. We'll see you next time.